Hi, guys. Welcome to the How I Raised It podcast, the show where you get an inside, unfiltered look at how real entrepreneurs raise capital for their businesses. I'm your host, Nathan Beckert, and today's episode is with Quaid Walker of Bezel. Bezel is building a marketplace for high-end watches. Think Rolex, Omega, etc. Quaid raised an $8 million seed round from both VCs and several high-profile folks such as John Legend, Kevin Hart, Michael Ovitz, and others. So we get into the details of how to get connections and pitch to celebrities and other influencers. If you're tuning into this podcast to learn how to raise capital for your business, I've created a super valuable free welcome package for you. It includes a list of 2,500 investors who don't require one intro, plus 200 questions that investors are going to ask you. So it's really going to help you get ready to raise capital. To get instant access to this, please click the link in the first comment. While you're there, please leave us a nice comment, what you like about this show or this series in general. And last but not least, if you enjoy this conversation and think someone else would too, please share it with them and hit that subscribe button to get all our latest episodes. Thank you. Now sit back and enjoy this chat with Quaid.
Welcome to How I Raised It, the podcast that goes behind the scenes with entrepreneurs who've raised capital. We uncover the tips, tricks, and techniques they use to get investors to write a check. Strap in and turn it up.
Hi, welcome to another episode of How I Raised It, produced by foundersuite.com. Today I have Quaid Walker of Bezel coming to us from Los Angeles. How's it going?
Things are great. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, let's jump right into it. What is Bezel?
Bezel is an authenticated luxury marketplace for high-end watches. We launched kind of publicly in June of last year, so we're still relatively new to the space, but you've been growing really, really fast, and it's been super fun.
So these are, I'm assuming these are Rolexes and, like fairly, it's all high-end stuff. Patek Philippe, I'm probably not even pronouncing these names right, but
You got it.
That's the core product? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So we offer kind of watches in the $2,000 kind of minimum range all the way up to multi-million-dollar pieces. The goal is kind of to build out the best experience for buying your first watch all the way up to kind of supporting a larger collector's collection. The way that we thought about building the business from the very beginning was putting authentication at the forefront. So kind of the main differentiator for us comparatively to the rest of the industry is just once you go on the app or the site, you can browse, thousands of listings. Anything that you find and ultimately transact on ships to us. We have an in-house authentication team from some of the best watchmakers and authenticators in the industry. We spend about a day with the watch or day to two to make sure it's, running the way you would expect. It's completely authentic. It's verified against a number of different touch points, and you're just getting the watch that you would expect.
So these are all used or previously owned, maybe is the better.
We're on the secondary market, and we offer watches that are unworn. So watches, that may have been purchased by a dealer or someone directly from a boutique, but have never been worn. And then we have watches that are pre-owned as well, or pre-loved is the term we love to say.
Yeah, previous caretaker, something
exactly.
like that, right? Very interesting. I just got back from Italy and I binge watched Succession on the whole way back.
Yep.
I'm sure you know where I'm going with this. There's a great scene where Greg, the young guy, just bought a $40,000 watch or something.
Exactly. Totally. There's been so much amazing watch content that came out of Succession too. And did you watch both seasons? I don't want to give anything away in the podcast.
I'm not on the newest season. I guess I'm finishing 3. So yeah.
So the best part is as the progression of the characters starts to unfold, you see the watch choices change. And like some characters get more bold and they're wearing like Richard Milles versus, Greg getting his first Rolex and it being a commemorative moment and he has to pay for it and it being hilarious. So whoever kind of styled watches for them did an amazing job of allowing them to match the characters.
That's awesome. So what's the story behind this? Were you just into watches and you're like, hey, there should be a better way to buy these watches or what?
Yeah, so I was certainly into them. You could say I was maybe a little bit obsessed by them. But I think my background is particularly interesting in the industry because I haven't spent a lot of time on watches. Like my background is very much in the technology and kind of the product world. So I kind of entered the space as an enthusiast and I felt a lot of the problems that a lot of the earliest newer collectors, I think, feel in the industry. And that's kind of how Bezel came about. So I was at Google prior to Bezel. I spent majority of my career there as a kind of designer on the product side. And as soon as I got my first bonus, the crazy decision I made was to buy a Rolex with it. I grew up, my parents didn't wear watches, but I always, on kind of like the movie stars I had seen and like the people that I looked up with, to me, it symbolized like I've arrived in many ways. And it just lived as this very expressive thing that, you could wear and celebrate. And so I made my first purchase while I was there. And I realized like you could buy these things rationally and be very intelligent about what you purchased. And I got obsessed with the hunt and finding them. And so I dove very deep. But the nature of kind of the watch industry and how it works was so alien to me at the time. So, you walk into a Rolex boutique and you think you can just buy a watch like you can buy any other good. But there's massive wait lists and you have to have purchase history, and you can't just simply like walk into a store and acquire these things at retail. So a lot of the buyers, myself included, were pushed to the secondary market, and there's so much information, and you have to all of a sudden be an authenticator yourself, and you have to know what's a fake watch and what's a real watch. And it was just very intimidating. So we built the business around, offering the best place possible for you to kind of buy your first watch, and scaled from there, very much inspired. I was a sneaker collector before I was a watch collector. And so I had such experience with products like StockX and GOAT that have really nailed that space in the sneaker space and the kind of streetwear space. So the thinking was, how do you bridge the gap between the watch world and the technology world and build a product that really offers that degree of security as a first-time buyer?
Interesting. And you mentioned a few minutes ago, you have a team of in-house authenticators. I assume the fakes are huge issue. Are fakes, you see them down in Canal Street in New York or whatever, maybe they're not there anymore. That I might be dating myself.
No, they sure are.
Yeah. Okay. Are the fakes pretty good? I mean, can you get no?
They're incredible. So, and when we say inauthentic, like I like to think that we have the strictest authentication process in the industry right now. And it's really a spectrum, and it's an array of things. So it could be on one side of the spectrum, the extreme, like a completely fake movement, completely fake watch. And the super fakes are of the highest quality. We have several of them that come through the authentication process. And I remember one specific instance of it. I was wearing a Daytona that day, and we had a black ceramic Daytona that came in as a kind of a fake, and it didn't pass our authenticity check. And I was like nervous to have my watch around because I couldn't tell the difference at all. But our first hire came over from Sotheby's. His name was Ryan Chong. He kind of had a career in authenticating watches. A lot of our investors are some of the largest names in the secondary market for watches. And we've just built out a team of folks from Sotheby's, from Christie's, from other watchmaking institutions. And we make sure that every single watch that comes through, it's coming through multiple points of contact. So it's going to our authenticators that have authenticated thousands of watches. It's going to our watchmaker that's running diagnostic checks and opening up the watches if necessary, and that whole process. So we see everything all the way down to watches that are slightly modified, and that kind of is not something we can pass on to a customer. We've had watches that we run every watch against a art loss registry. So we've had watches that have been reported stolen in high-profile samurai sword cases in London that we obviously couldn't pass on to the client. So we kind of see everything.
Okay, not to go down too much of a rabbit hole, but what, like in a really high-quality fake, what can your authentic, and maybe you can't even talk about this because you maybe don't want to give away your secret sauce, but what are they kind of looking for? Like, is it the precision of the gears, or something else? Like,
it's so many things. So there's a number of touch points they're examining, and obviously those touch points change watch per watch, but it's a hands-on experience of how the watch feels. We're running it as a bunch of diagnostic tests. We're getting it under a loop. Like, we're looking at all these different touch points. We've had watches that had been largely factory movements, and but they just weren't born that way. Like, we'll see a lot of like neo vintage Datejusts that come in from Rolex that may have they have been born a different reference number, but the dial have been swapped out, or things have been re-engraved, or everything like that. And it goes down to the nuance of how the papers feel and how they smell and everything in between. So it's a very, very scientific aspect of it, but there's also such like a human high touch art of just seeing thousands and thousands of things over the course of a storied career for authenticators.
All right, last question, because I didn't want to make this whole topic about fake Rolexes, but
no, it's great.
Where are the fakes manufactured? Are they made in China, or are they made also in like Switzerland and some, secret factory there or something?
It's an interesting question. And I think it goes back to kind of the spectrum answer, in the sense that, like, there are a number of these super fakes that come from many different places. And they're kind of sold in the kind of areas that you were described. Like, a lot of folks are interested in buying a super fake because they want to try out the watch. We don't certainly condone that at all. But then, they get their way into the overall watch system, and you have dealers that maybe don't know what they're looking at, ending up perpetuating it. You have buyers that, maybe were gifted it and they thought they had a real Rolex and they try to resell it. So they end up finding their way into the real system. So I think they come from all over on the super fake side. And then you just have a lot of folks that will try to take advantage of buyers somewhere in between. So you might have, because the challenge with the watch industry is like so much asymmetry in information, and so much information lies on the seller's side that sometimes the buyers don't know where to begin. And like, if you think about it, it's an industry where it's a really complex piece that you're purchasing. Our average order values like just north of $11,000. Like, these are really expensive items. Yeah. If you can polish a watch and say it was never been polished, like, you get more value added. If you swap the dials and make it feel like a more in-demand color of something, you get more value out of it. Like, that's kind of the level of deception that happens in the industry and has happened for a number of years. And that happens all over. That happens from, like just new dealers. It happens from more structured dealers, random individuals. And our job is just sniff all that out and make sure, as a buyer, if you're purchasing anything from Bezel, that we have your back, and we're making sure that none of those end up going to you.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. One more question about watches, and then we'll get into the fundraising, which is really what this show is about. What, I'm not a watch guy. I'll be honest. I wear a couple-year-old Apple Watch. But what is it about watches that is, I almost thought like the high-end watch market would kind of disappear with the younger generation. I mean, like, you're obviously younger than me, and you are into watches. Is that a common thing? Like, what is it keeping, this relevant to new and younger generations? I don't know. It's a broad question, but
no,
you can do with it.
It's a very important question. It's also a big one. And I think if you asked a number of folks that collect watches, the fun part about watches, you're gonna get a lot of the same answers, and then you're gonna get a lot of individualized answers. I think my personal answer about what got me into watches is I had worked at startups and Google before this. My job is staring at a computer screen, but I've always had a passion for craft. And there's something so compelling about the artistry that goes into building a mechanical object like a watch. And the fact that, these things are built as tools in many ways, and you have like different complications for the watches that were designed to do different things. Like, I'm wearing a GMT right now, which, is designed for pilots to track multiple time zones. I don't use it to track multiple time zones, but like that heritage of it being a tool is super compelling. And the fact that you service these objects and they can last lifetimes and you pass them on, that was always, Patek Philippe's kind of coinage was, you're not owning it. You're basically just watching it for the next generation of collectors. And I think something so romantic about that. I think recently the watch market has taken off kind of alongside a lot of the other collectible categories, in the sense that, like, from a rational perspective, it's outperformed gold, it's outperformed real estate, it's outperformed a lot of these asset classes. And you're seeing folks dive into art deeper than ever. I think like crypto caused a lot of folks to be really interested in just diversifying their asset classes. Yeah. And the cool thing about watches is, if I go on watch podcasts, sometimes folks, they go back and forth on like, is this good for the watch world that people are evaluating as investments? I'm torn either way. I think like you should collect watches for how you want to collect them. The one thing that I think is unique from an asset class is you get to wear these things and be expressive. Like, you can park value in a Rolex, and then you can wear it to a dinner, or you can wear it to a night out or a trip, and you can meet someone who also loves watches, and it's a conversation starter. And I think like the watch community, more so than a lot of other communities I've been a part of, there's such commitment to, understanding and knowledge kind of dissemination and just learning from each other that it just gets really addicting. And I think it's been really awesome to see this new generation of collectors. So it's interesting that you brought up the Apple Watch too. We have a lot of folks that buy an Apple Watch as their first watch. and they realize they actually like having something on their wrist, and it's kind of the catalyst for them to make the decision and say, hey, I have this on my wrist. Like, I'm going to a wedding next weekend. I just got my big bonus. Like, maybe I upgrade this to, a watch that, feels a little bit dressier, whatever that is. And then you get bit by the bug and they come back for 5 more watches in the next 2 years and they're a great client. So it's really interesting.
That is interesting. I didn't wear a watch before the Apple Watch. So yeah, I
exactly.
totally see that. It's a gateway drug.
100%.
Last question, I swear. Does wearing a watch decrease its value, or is it like Star Wars collectibles where you got to keep it in its original packaging to really make it
It very much depends on the watch, and obviously condition is something that factors into the value of the watch. And so I think it's kind of usually a cost benefit analysis with the collector of like, why are they buying this watch, and like ultimately what is the heritage of this watch, the provenance of this watch in the specific model. For vintage pieces, like certainly you want things that are unpolished but like still look like they've been untouched. You want less stretching, things like that. On more of the modern aspect of the world, you might take a slight condition hit as you start to wear it if you really beat it up. But I don't know, it varies piece to piece. Like a great example, there's watches in my collection that I purchased them at a great moment. They got discontinued by Rolex. I go swimming in them, I go surfing in them, I wear them around, and they still increase in value because the market just increased really quickly. And you have watches that are meant for very kind of fragile purposes, and they're really particular about how you should wear them, and maybe I wouldn't go out and get them in the ocean and beat them up. So I think it depends piece by piece. I would say like it is certainly a more durable asset class than cars and art and other collectibles. So I think that's kind of the appeal there, that these are still watches and they're ultimately tools to be worn and used. I'm a firm believer that you should buy these things and you should enjoy them and you should wear them. But obviously different collectors vary on that side.
All right, let's talk about fundraising. You raised an $8 million seed round, and really interesting investors. I'll just throw out a few names from your website, like John Legend and Kevin Hart and Michael Ovitz, as well as some venture firms. Talk about putting together this funding round. Take us through it.
Some of our earliest advisors. So, I mean, I'm candidly a first-time founder. So I spent most of my time in career. And so I spent a lot of time working with a lot of amazing mentors in the very beginning about kind of like wrapping our head around this fundraising process. And it's myself and 2 co-founders kind of started the business and kicked it off from there. The biggest piece of advice that we learned in the early days, which I think has been the way that we've structured our round going forward, is just being very intentional about the narrative of who you have around the table as a means of giving you an unfair advantage to build the business that you want to build. Like, it's not just capital to us. And so the narrative that we were trying to tell is like, sure, authenticity is what we care about the most, but also from a brand perspective, the watch market is swaying decidedly younger than you would think. And that's, you so astutely pointed out, 60% of the pre-owned watch market requests are coming from millennial and Gen Z buyers. How do you build a brand in the secondary market that feels like it doesn't just capture the existing audience, but it feels like future-proof to prove out from a cultural perspective? It feels aligned with where the watch market is going. And the best way we thought about doing that was getting folks that are the tastemakers for watches and other industries to kind of get around the table. So the way we thought about fundraising was getting kind of 3 types of individuals in. We knew we wanted like the previous operator venture knowledge. So BoxGroup led around with Courtside Ventures. We had a bunch of funds that were really specific on the seed round level. Like, we wanted folks that knew how to go 0 to 1 and knew how to back businesses on that side. So we were laser focused on kind of seed stage funds. And then the second group of individuals we really cared about were like these notable collectors. So folks like Kevin Hart that you mentioned, one of the most prolific watch collectors kind of in the celebrity space out there. John Legend, Michael Ovitz, one of the largest collections out there. And then, John Legend is just such a tastemaker and being able to kind of sway the industry. We have folks like Michael Rubin and Steve Aoki and Kyle Kuzma, and like all these individuals that feel like they bring a new pulse to the industry in a really exciting way. So getting those folks around the table. And then the last category were kind of watch industry experts. So I think my superpower going into this is that I viewed it kind of from an outside in perspective. but the watch table is a relatively small table. We wanted to make sure that we kind of initially grabbed credibility from a lot of really, really incredible folks in the watch industry. So, in our seed, we announced John Reardon as an investor, a bunch of amazing sellers. John Reardon is like one of the biggest names in Patek Philippe and was kind of the head of international watches at Christie's for a while. And then just a bunch of other really awesome watch kind of movers and shakers to make sure we felt like we had everything we need to move forward and tell the narrative we wanted to tell.
Yeah, that's amazing. Very, very thoughtful too in how you approach it. So I guess two-part question. How do you identify that someone like Michael Ovitz is a watch collector? And then how do you, or even Kevin Hart or, any of these guys.
Yeah.
How do you get in touch with Michael Ovitz?
Yeah, no, it's awesome. So a lot of this was like so obvious from my side as a massive kind of enthusiast of the watch space. Like I followed all these individuals. I follow all the watch blogs. I knew that they were kind of some of the large collectors. There's probably like a top 10 arbitrary number, but a small group of individuals that are celebrities that are always thrown around as really big collectors. And they certainly were on the short list. So we had a list of folks that we wanted to reach. And then as we started to do outreach and kind of the venture model, as it sounds like you know very well, there's just intros that get offered, and you meet with a fund and the fund's excited and they're like, oh, have you talked to so-and-so? He's a massive watch guy. And then we kind of trail down that path. So my co-founders and I had a list of folks that were kind of on our dream list, and we're super excited to have gotten a good amount of them. And then we had a lot of folks that, were introduced through the rounds that ended up being really, really happy surprises. As far as how the intros happened, I wish it was some sweet story that I like hung out with all these people and I had all these connections and I went into it and I just gave them calls. It was actually a bit of a grind in the sense that I was so lucky to have folks in my corner that were our earliest angel investors that then made intros to kind of larger funds that ended up backing us. And then either more of those angels or their funds just kind of like exercise their network. And we ended up getting in touch with who we wanted. I think my learning there was it's kind of like the squeaky wheel gets the oil kind of mentality, in the sense that it felt ridiculous going into a meeting with a new investor and saying, hey, I really would love to meet with Kevin Hart, please. And it felt ridiculous, but some people have those connections that I did not have, and they made it work. And the cool thing about our pitch is just if you love watches and you are a watch person and you are also kind of a seed stage investor, it was such a really great fit. Yeah. And I think they got excited about the ability to kind of build a brand that feels newer and fresher in the space, but do it in a way that feels authentic to horology and the history that exists, is kind of the line that we try to ride. So yeah, it's been really, really awesome and so fun to work with. We have some really exciting announcements to come in the next few months where a lot of our investors are sitting down with us and talking about their watch collecting journeys and what that means. And so it's just been really fun.
That's great. I mean, that's good. So when you get a meeting with Kevin Hart or, any of these celebrities, frankly, do you go in? Well, first of all, do you pitch Kevin or do you pitch his representative? And then do you go in with any particular kind of mindset or even different approach than you would for a normal investor? Yeah,
totally. I mean, it varies. It varies person to person. A lot of them have, like Kevin, for example, has a fund, right? So Kevin has HartBeat Ventures. So we spent a lot of time with Rob from HartBeat Ventures, and it's like very much evaluated as like a ventures check, right? And then you have other folks that are just strict angels and evaluate deals themselves. So it kind of varies from individual to individual. I mean, it's exactly what you would expect it to be. Like, I'm huge fans of all these people, so you give yourself a little bit of a pep talk before, and you try to appeal to what that they love out of a business, and then B, from a watch perspective. And before talking to John, before talking to Kevin, like I did a ton of investment in kind of understanding who they are, what they love, learning everything about them. So the same way that I would prep for any really important meeting, it's just you have that obvious, like, wow, I'm talking to this person and they're so impressive and like they're so famous and they're incredible. But ultimately, they're all just like incredibly intelligent individuals that are really principled about the checks that they write. And I was super impressed through the entire process, like what questions were asked. And it wasn't just, oh, this is a watch business, I'm interested, I like watches. It was, how are you going to lower CAC? What's the long-term plan here? Like, how do you think of your business in chapters? Like, cool, you're a marketplace, what happens next? Are you going to stay entirely verticalized? Or do you want to, look at other verticals? Like, hard-hitting questions. And it was just like super fun to sit there and go back to back. And as long as we felt really strong about our narrative, I think that came through in the conversation. And yeah, it was awesome.
You don't have to answer this, but any celebrity that you got up to the boat, but then slipped off the hook that you just wish you got into the boat?
There's a couple of them obviously out there that were on our top lists, and I think I don't want to name names because I don't know if the conversations are done. I think we certainly want to keep it going. I would say that a lot of the reasoning for when those didn't make sense was probably stage specific. Like, you had a lot of folks, especially obviously in the last year or so, where maybe seed round venture wasn't what they were particularly interested in, or you have a lot of these individuals that don't run funds, but they leverage kind of early stage venture as a diversification in their otherwise existing portfolio. And they pull back on some of those allocations right now because the market's a little crazy. So they kind of wanted to see where it was sitting. And then a lot of folks don't like consumer or whatever it is. Everyone has kind of their, strategy and how they invest. But I like to think that, if we have synergy with anyone in there and it makes sense, like I'm persistent and the goal is to ultimately get us to a point where our narrative makes sense for them.
Yeah, good. All right. I won't keep you too much longer here, but first time founder, anything you would do differently, any advice you would give your younger self if you were starting all over again, or any just general advice you'd like to give other, first time founders, maybe going after celebrity investors, anything at all, really?
I think like I have a venture note and I have like a general note. I think the general note is the people you start the business with are the most important thing you will ever do in the business, and being very intentional about who you pick. I'm so lucky that my two co-founders I couldn't imagine finding better people to be doing this with. And so I think that was like the sweet spot that I luckily discovered. And we had a long history together. Our CTO and co-founder, Daryl, we've worked in our business before in the past. And my co-founder, Chase, and I grew up together. And we have very complementary skill sets. I think the biggest thing that we did is we split everything equitably. Like we are true co-founders. This is all of our business together. And that's been the biggest thing ever. I'm a huge, I know Paul Graham writes about that all the time in kind of the documentation there, but it's like, if they are your co-founders, they are equal to you and they own the same amount of business as you, and you're making decisions equally and equitably. We made that decision. I don't know if it works for everyone, but that was the best thing we could have ever done. And we're all so motivated and I'm so lucky to work with them. And then from a venture side, it's super intimidating to enter the venture space with not a ton of connections. Like to go out and raise $8 million is like a really daunting thing to think about.
It's a good seed round. I mean, that's a
totally
seed round. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And so, making sure you are confident with the numbers you want to hit, like you're not undercapitalizing the business. One of our earliest investors said the really poignant thing that like dilution doesn't happen in rounds, it happens in between rounds. And so making sure like you're not undercapitalizing your business, you're raising the amount that you need, but making sure that if like you need help getting to the bigger funds and getting to the next round, like you're building an operator network of other folks that are angel investors that have done this before, and maybe they've sold their first business or they've raised big rounds and they're running massive startups at this stage. Those are the people that I think I went towards first, and they have still been the most helpful investors that I have had. So previous operators that can tell you what to do when things are going wrong and how to write an investor update and things like that. Like the questions that you might think are embarrassing to ask the partner that led your round, you maybe would ask your operator friend, their investor that you can text. So I think the most impactful investors that we had were just our earliest angels that kind of started this whole process for us.
Yeah. Interesting. Very cool. if people want to learn more, or I guess purchase a watch, they go to shop.getbezel.com. Is
Yeah,
that
just
correct?
getbezel.com is the URL, or also you can find us on the App Store. We're app first. You search Bezel on the App Store, we're in there.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
Well, it's cool stuff. I'll probably. It's always dangerous because I'm the OCD type that if I start collecting something, I go crazy with it. So I probably better not go to your site, but everyone else should go check it out.
I think maybe you should too. We love those kind of customers, but gotta make that call.
We'll see. I need to have a exit or something for Founders Rate,
Yeah.
and then we'll look at the right watch. What's
Awesome. Well,
what's
go
what's
ahead.
the best watch to look at for a first time watch? Is it? I mean, like if you, I know that's an impossible question, but like if you were
It depends
saying,
on your taste. Like we have a lot of really awesome first time watches. It obviously depends on your budget and everything that is. I think like, from a stylistic perspective, if I'm buying a first time watch, you're buying a watch that you want to daily drive is the term that we use. So if you have a job that is more dressed up, you're buying a dressier watch, and maybe that's a date just or something like that on like a Cartier, things like that. Or if you're a little bit more of an active lifestyle, you're buying something maybe on like a rubber strap, or a Tudor or an Omega or things like that. So it really depends on your lifestyle and your choices there, but we got a lot of great options.
awesome, very good. Is Tag Heuer in the same category? That's a lower
I
brand
wouldn't
now.
say it's lower. It's a little on the price point. It's a bit low. We do sell some tags and things
Yeah,
like that. So yeah, it's definitely in there. But yeah, totally.
just curious.
Yeah,
All right, thank you, Quaid. This is fun, very interesting, and keep up the good work. Curious to see where your business goes from here. So appreciate it.
awesome. Thanks so much. Super fun, and thanks for having me.
Over now. Cheers.
Yeah.